Samuel Harrison had been invisible for 2 years. The night shift stretched ahead of him like every other night for the past 2 years, a landscape of flickering fluorescent lights and the steady drip of pipes that the luminary engineers could not be bothered to fix. Washington humidity crept into every corner of the embassy basement, turning the air thick and close despite the alien climate control systems that hummed through walls he had learned to navigate better than any of the actual diplomats upstairs. 2 in the morning meant the third-floor reception halls stood empty, their grand windows overlooking Massachusetts Avenue, dark except for the occasional passing taxi. Sam pushed his maintenance cart past the ceremonial chambers, where humans and luminary pretended to understand each other during daylight hours, past the conference rooms where treaties got signed and photographed and promptly ignored. His reflection caught in polished obsidian walls the aliens favored. A 68-year-old man in a gray uniform that had seen better decades, his face carrying the kind of weathered exhaustion that came from surviving things that should have killed him. The Distinguished Service Cross sat in a box in his apartment, untouched for 40 years. The wedding ring he had buried with Ellen 5 years ago. The photographs of his daughter who had stopped returning his calls after the funeral, who had decided a washed-up medic with survivor's guilt made for poor family material. All of it boxed away, same as the man himself. He checked the pipe junction near Lab 7, noting the pressure gauge that always ran slightly high, the way the metal groaned when the filtration system cycled through its evening purge. 34 years since CAFG, 3 since his last emergency call as a Chicago paramedic, and now he changed light bulbs for creatures who barely registered his existence. But Sam noticed everything. The security rotation that changed every 3 hours, the sealed labs that required biometric access he did not have, the way certain guards whispered in their own language when they thought no humans could hear. The basement level housed the research wings, all of them locked behind doors that did not appear on any public embassy map. Sam had learned their locations through 2 years of careful observation, the same way he had learned patrol patterns in desert that tried to kill him in Chicago neighborhoods that succeeded in killing others. Eyes open, mouth shut, hands ready. Sergeant Chen had drilled that into him before the old man took shrapnel at Forward Operating Base Viper, and Sam had carried it through everything that came after. A commotion erupted from Lab 7, voices raised in the clipped tones of luminary argument. Sam slowed his cart, positioning himself near the recycling alcove that gave him a sight line to the reinforced door. 3 guards emerged dragging equipment, their movements hurried and sloppy in a way that suggested orders from someone who did not care about protocol. One of the guards, a young male with the deep purple skin that marked him as lower caste, muttered something that Sam's rudimentary understanding of their language could not fully parse. But he caught 2 words that needed no translation. Subject 7 and disposal. Disposal. The bureaucratic term the luminary used for termination of failed experiments. Sam had heard it twice before, both times followed by the incineration of genetic material that had ceased to serve diplomatic purpose. Through the gap in the doorway, before the guards sealed it behind them, Sam glimpsed a figure slumped against an examination table. Blue-skinned, female, drugged into near unconsciousness, her body emitting a faint luminescence that flickered like a dying bulb. Not equipment, a person. The guards passed him without acknowledgement, their eyes sliding over his maintenance uniform the way eyes had slid over him for 2 years. Invisible, convenient, beneath notice. Sam waited until their footsteps faded toward the upper levels before moving his cart closer to Lab 7. The security panel blinked red, biometric lock engaged, but the ventilation grate above it hung slightly askew from the hasty evacuation. Old habits surfaced, the ones that had kept him alive in places where official channels meant death. He noted the time, the guard rotation, the fact that Level 7 had exactly 1 security camera and it pointed at the main entrance, not the maintenance access. 2 more guards approached from the north corridor, scientists based on their white coats rather than armor. Sam pretended to check a wall panel, his weathered hands moving through familiar motions while his ears tracked their conversation. The older scientist's voice carried frustration. Subject 7's blood work came back. She's not a failed experiment. Her companion, younger and clearly nervous, glanced around before responding. Doesn't matter what the blood work says. Council wants her gone. The treaty needs fresh sacrifices to maintain the optics. They're forcing her into that human marriage protocol tomorrow. Old janitor, I heard, the one who works nights. Sam's hands stopped moving. The scientists disappeared into Lab 4, their conversation cut off by the pneumatic hiss of sealing doors. Sam stood alone in the corridor, maintenance panel forgotten, his mind processing information that she suddenly made his own invisibility feel like a target rather than camouflage. Marriage protocol. The treaty provision that required periodic human luminary unions to demonstrate the alliance's commitment to integration. 5 such marriages in 15 years, all of them politically calculated matches between low-level human diplomats and luminary civilians. Sam had read about them in the break room, brief news items that generated a week of human interest stories before fading into bureaucratic obscurity. He was not a diplomat. He was a janitor who cleaned toilets and fixed electrical shorts and disappeared into the background of an embassy that had never asked his name, which made him exactly the kind of expendable the council would choose for whatever disposal they had planned. Sleep did not come when Sam returned to his studio apartment in Columbia Heights, the one with water stains on the ceiling and neighbors who played music until dawn. He sat on the edge of his bed, the field medic kit resting on his knees, its canvas worn soft from decades of carrying. Inside, tourniquets, gauze, trauma shears, antibiotics he had quietly collected over the years from sympathetic ER nurses who remembered when he had saved lives instead of mopping floors. The Distinguished Service Cross stayed in its box, but this kit traveled everywhere. His hands moved through inventory by touch, muscle memory from 1,000 nights when checking supplies meant the difference between bringing someone home or shipping them back in pieces. Martinez's face surfaced from memory, 20 years old and bleeding out from a gut shot at KFG, while Sam's hands worked to hold organs inside a body that wanted to quit. "Stay with me, Martinez. Stay with me." But Martinez had gone anyway, and Sam had carried the guilt for 34 years, through a marriage that tried to heal him, a career that tried to give him purpose, and a daughter who had looked at him one day and asked why he cared more about strangers than his own family. He had not known how to explain that saving strangers was the only way he knew to make Martinez's death matter. Dawn broke over Washington with the humid promise of another August scorcher. Sam showered, dressed in his maintenance uniform, and reported to the embassy at his usual time despite having slept 0 hours. The guards at the main entrance waved him through without scanning his badge, their attention focused on the protesters who gathered every morning across the street, humans who held signs about alien rights and conspiracy theories that occasionally brushed against uncomfortable truths. The summons came at 9, delivered by a junior luminary administrator whose purple skin had not yet darkened into the authority of age. She spoke without meeting his eyes, her English carrying the flat precision of someone who had learned it from language software rather than conversation. "Report to Ceremonial Chamber 7. Immediately. Bring nothing." Sam left his maintenance card in the custodial closet, but the field medic kit went into his pocket, small enough to hide and too essential to abandon. Ceremonial Chamber 7 occupied the embassy's second floor, its walls carved from the same obsidian that lined the diplomatic halls but polished to a mirror finish that caught and reflected the elaborate ceiling lights. 12 council members stood in a semicircle, their robes marking them as the embassy's true power structure. The ones who made decisions, while the official ambassador smiled for human cameras. At the center stood Chancellor Vorath, his silver skin and age-darkened features identifying him as someone who had lived 3 human lifetimes and accumulated authority to match. Sam stopped at the threshold, military training overriding the instinct to flee. Stand straight, eyes forward, wait for orders. Vorath's gaze swept over him with the interest one might give to a piece of furniture being delivered. Samuel Harrison, maintenance supervisor, night shift, widower, no family, 68 years of age. Not a question. A recitation of facts pulled from whatever background check the embassy conducted on its human staff. Sam's jaw tightened. "That's right. You have been selected for an honor." Vorath's tone suggested honor meant something very different in his language. "The treaty requires periodic human luminary unions to demonstrate our species' commitment to integration and mutual understanding. You will participate in such a union today." The other council members watched with the detached interest of people observing a transaction that held no personal stakes. Sam's mind raced through options that narrowed to nothing. Embassy sovereign territory. Refusal meant deportation at minimum, imprisonment at maximum, and the woman in Lab 7 still facing whatever disposal they had planned. His voice came out steady despite the rage building in his chest. I'm 68 years old. I clean toilets. What kind of integration does that demonstrate? The practical kind. Vorath's smile held no warmth. The treaty does not specify status or age, only participation. You are human. You are available. You are ideal. Sam understood. Expendable, disposable. The kind of sacrifice that would not generate questions from the human government because maintenance workers did not have senators who asked about them. Two guards materialized at his shoulders, not touching, but close enough to make their purpose clear. Vorath continued, the ceremony will begin in 1 hour. You will be prepared. You will comply. Failure to do so will result in immediate deportation and permanent prohibition from all luminary territories. Given your employment history, I suspect finding alternative work would prove challenging. Sam bit back the response building in his throat. In Gulf War, talking back to authority got you killed. In Chicago, it got you fired. Here, it would accomplish nothing except eliminating any chance he had to help the woman he had seen drugged and dying in Lab 7. He nodded once. The guards escorted him to a preparation chamber where an attendant handed him formal clothing that felt more like a costume, dark tunic, fitted trousers, boots that pinched his feet. No one explained the ceremony's structure or what would be expected of him afterward. No one asked if he had questions. The attendant worked in silence, adjusting the tunic's collar with impersonal efficiency before gesturing toward the door. Ceremonial Chamber 7 had transformed during the hour of his preparation. The council members now flanked an elevated platform where two cushions rested several feet apart. Lighting had shifted to something dim and reddish, casting shadows that made the obsidian walls seem to pulse. Human diplomats occupied seats along the far wall, their presence fulfilling whatever requirement the treaty demanded for witnesses. None of them looked at Sam. None of them questioned why a maintenance worker had been selected for an event typically reserved for carefully vetted political operatives. The guards positioned Sam at the platform's base. His hands wanted to curl into fists, but he forced them flat against his thighs, the old discipline holding through sheer repetition. Stand straight, eyes forward. Survive the moment. Doors opened at the chamber's far end. They brought her in the same way they had removed equipment from Lab 7, quickly, efficiently, with the care one might give to cargo that required minimal damage before disposal. Seraphine wore a pale robe that did nothing to hide how thin she had become, how her blue-tinged skin seemed to hang on a frame that had been systematically starved. Her hair fell in tangled waves across a face she kept turned toward the floor, her movements sluggish in the way that suggested recent sedation. Two guards gripped her upper arms, not gently, steering her toward the platform where Sam waited. The council members whispered among themselves, their language flowing too quickly for Sam to catch individual words. But their tone carried clearly enough. Disdain, satisfaction, the particular pleasure that came from disposing of a problem in a way that served multiple purposes. Vorath raised one hand and the chamber fell silent. His voice took on ceremonial weight. We gather to honor the ancient protocols of bonding, to demonstrate the unity between luminary and human, to fulfill the sacred obligations of the treaty that binds our peoples in peace and mutual prosperity. The words rang hollow, performed for the human witnesses who would report back to their government that the luminary took integration seriously. Samuel Harrison of Earth, do you accept the responsibilities and privileges of bonding with the chosen representative of luminary? Sam's throat felt tight. He looked at Seraphine, at the way she trembled despite whatever drugs still coursed through her system, at the resignation in every line of her body. This was not a marriage. This was an execution dressed in ceremony. But saying no meant walking away, leaving her to whatever came next. His voice came out rough. I do. Vorath turned to Seraphine. Subject 7, do you accept the responsibilities and privileges of bonding with the chosen representative of humanity? Seraphine's head lifted slightly. Her eyes, when Sam finally saw them, shone with a luminescence that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than simple biology. Fear lived in those eyes. Fear and something else that looked like apology. Her whisper barely carried. I do. Then by the authority of the Council and the treaty that governs all relations between our species, I declare you bonded. May your union serve the greater purposes of peace. No rings, no kiss. No moment of connection that might suggest actual consent had occurred. The guards released Seraphine's arms and she swayed, catching herself on the platform's edge before Sam could move to steady her. Voreth's gaze swept across both of them with the finality of a judge passing sentence. You have 72 hours to demonstrate the viability of this bond. Failure to do so will result in annulment and appropriate consequences for both parties. Quarters have been prepared on level 3. You will remain there until the assessment period concludes. The human diplomats filed out, their expressions carefully neutral in the way that suggested they would file reports and then forget this ceremony had ever happened. The council members dispersed with similar efficiency, their robes whispering against obsidian as they returned to whatever business actually mattered to them. Sam stood alone on the platform with a woman who had been declared his wife without ever speaking his name. She raised her head slowly, the movement costing visible effort. Her voice came out thin, abraded by whatever they had forced down her throat to keep her compliant. You should have refused. Sam's hands uncurled. He took one step closer, not touching, giving her space to decide if proximity felt like threat or possibility. Ma'am, I don't think refusal was an option either of us had. They will kill you because of me. She spoke with flat certainty, the kind that came from years of watching promises turn into lies. That is what the assessment period means. 72 hours for them to arrange an accident that eliminates both problems at once. Then I guess we better make sure that doesn't happen. Seraphine's eyes widened slightly, the first crack in the resignation she wore like armor. You do not understand. I am not what they told you. I am defective, cursed. They have been trying to dispose of me for months, but the treaty requires documentation and process. This marriage gives them the cover they need. Sam reached into his pocket and pulled out the field medic kit, its canvas darkened by decades of carrying. Seraphine flinched, but he simply opened it, showing her the supplies inside. Gauze, antibiotics, trauma shears, all the tools that had once meant the difference between life and death in places where both came quickly. His voice dropped into the calm he had learned at Kafji, the tone that convinced dying men to hang on just a little longer. Ma'am, my name is Sam. I was a combat medic in Gulf War, a paramedic in Chicago, and now I clean floors in this building. I have spent 34 years learning how to keep people alive when systems want them dead. So with all due respect, I understand exactly what they are trying to do. He gestured toward the door where guards waited to escort them to their assigned quarters. Right now, we are going to walk out of here together. We are going to get you somewhere private. And then you are going to let me check your vitals and figure out what they have been pumping into your system. Why? The question came out broken. Why would you help me? Sam met her luminescent eyes, saw the fear and confusion and desperate hope she was trying to smother. Because, ma'am, I don't leave people behind. Not in Gulf War, not in Chicago, not here. The guards led them through corridors Sam had mopped but never accessed, past checkpoints that required biometric scans he had only observed from a distance. Their assigned quarters occupied a section of Level 3 that served as transitional housing for luminary staff between diplomatic postings, functional but impersonal, designed for temporary occupation by people who would not leave any mark of having existed. The doors sealed behind them with a pneumatic hiss that sounded too much like finality. Seraphine moved to the far corner of the room and collapsed onto the cushioned platform that served as furniture, her body folding inward as whatever adrenaline had carried her through the ceremony finally exhausted itself. The trembling that had started in the chamber intensified, her hands shaking so violently she pressed them against her chest to hide the motion. Sam gave her space, using the time to assess their prison. One room, roughly 20 feet square, bathroom alcove behind a privacy screen, single exit with biometric lock, ventilation grates too small for escape, windows that looked out onto an interior courtyard 3 stories below, the kind designed to provide light without offering any path to freedom. Security camera in the upper corner, its lens tracking his movement with mechanical precision. He turned his back to the camera and let his voice carry just loud enough for Seraphine to hear over the climate control hum. Ma'am, I am going to come closer now. I need to check your pulse and look at your eyes. Is that all right? She nodded without lifting her head. Sam crossed the room and knelt beside the platform, his joints protesting the movement in a way they had not bothered to protest for 30 years. Up close, he could see the injection marks that dotted her inner arms, fresh ones layered over scarred tissue that suggested months of systematic drugging. Chemical smell clung to her, astringent and bitter, the kind of pharmaceutical cocktail designed to suppress rather than heal. His fingers found her pulse, counting the rhythm that came too fast and too shallow. How long have they been medicating you? I do not remember when it started. Her voice barely rose above a whisper. They said I was dangerous, unstable, that the drugs kept me from hurting others. Sam's jaw tightened. In Chicago, he had responded to too many calls where medication became control, where treatment became abuse, dressed in medical language. The pattern looked the same regardless of species. He reached for his field medic kit and extracted a pen light, the kind he had used to check pupil response in trauma victims. I need to look at your eyes. Can you lift your head for me? Seraphine raised her face slowly, every movement costing effort that should not have been necessary for someone her age. Her eyes caught the pen light beam and blazed, luminescence flaring in direct correlation to the stimulus. Sam watched the response, noting how her pupils dilated and contracted in patterns that suggested normal neurological function beneath whatever chemical suppression they had imposed. Have you always glowed like this? She flinched at the question. It is the defect, the curse. When I feel too much, the glow emerges. I cannot control it. It marks me as wrong. Sam clicked off the pen light and sat back on his heels. Ma'am, I am going to tell you something, and I need you to hear it. That glow is not a defect. That is a biological response to stimulus, same as any human might sweat or flush. Someone taught you to be ashamed of something that is just part of who you are. Her breath caught. You are lying to make me feel better. I am a 68-year-old man who has seen more death than most people can imagine. I stopped lying to make people feel better around the same time I realized feeling better was not the same as being alive. He gestured toward the injection marks on her arms. What have they been telling you these drugs do? Stabilize me, prevent the glow from harming others. And what happens when you do not take them? Seraphine's hands twisted in her lap. I become dangerous, unstable. I could hurt someone without meaning to. Sam had heard versions of this speech in Chicago emergency rooms, delivered by partners who had convinced victims that their natural responses justified control. The lies changed language but never structure. He pulled out a small bottle from his kit, antibiotics left over from a prescription he had not finished after a dental procedure. I am going to give you something that will help your body process whatever they have been pumping into you. It is going to make you feel worse before you feel better, but I need you to trust me on this. Why should I trust you? The question came without accusation. Simple confusion from someone who had learned trust meant pain. Sam's voice dropped into something gentler than he had allowed himself in years. Because, ma'am, I have spent my entire life learning how to see when someone is drowning. And right now, you are drowning. But I am very good at pulling people back. He handed her the pills in a cup of water from the bathroom alcove. Seraphine stared at them like they might transform into something dangerous, then swallowed them quickly, her throat working against reflex that wanted to reject anything entering her system. The glow began almost immediately. It started as a faint shimmer across her collarbone, then spread in waves that pulsed with her heartbeat. Seraphine gasped and pressed her hands to her face, trying to smother the light with physical pressure that could not possibly work. Sam moved closer, not touching, but present. Let it happen. I cannot. It will hurt you. Ma'am, if that glow was dangerous, they would not have drugged you to suppress it. They would have just isolated you. He kept his voice level, the same tone he had used to talk down panicking patients in Chicago alleys. This is your body trying to function the way it was designed to function. All you are doing right now is fighting yourself. The glow intensified, crawling up her neck and across her cheeks. Seraphine shook her head desperately, fingers digging into her own skin, hard enough to leave marks. Sam caught her wrists, not restraining, but steadying. Look at me. She did, luminescent eyes meeting his through the spaces between her fingers. I need you to breathe. In through your nose, out through your mouth, same as the rhythm I am showing you. He demonstrated, slow and controlled, the breathing pattern they had taught him for managing combat stress. You are safe here. Whatever happens, I am not going to let anyone hurt you. Seraphine's breathing hitched, stumbled, then gradually synchronized with his. The glow continued spreading, but its frantic quality softened into something more rhythmic, less like panic and more like the natural pulse of biology asserting itself. Minutes passed. Sam held her wrists, maintaining contact that reminded her she was not alone. While the drugs worked their way out of her system and her body remembered how to function without constant chemical suppression. The light that had terrified her began to settle into patterns that moved across her skin like aurora borealis, beautiful and strange and entirely natural. When she finally lowered her hands, the glow illuminated the entire room. Sam released her wrists and sat back, giving her space to process what had happened. How do you feel? Seraphine stared at her own hands, watching light ripple across blue-tinged skin. I do not know. Different. Clearer. Like something that was smothering me finally lifted. She looked up at him, confusion bright in her expression. You are not afraid. Should I be? Everyone else is. Sam shook his head. Ma'am, I have been afraid of plenty of things in my life. This is not one of them. He gestured toward the glow. That is just you, and from what I can see, you are remarkable. The word hit her like a physical blow. Her breath caught, tears suddenly tracking down her cheeks to catch and refract the light her own skin produced. No one has ever called me that. Then no one has been paying attention. Seraphine folded forward, shoulders shaking with sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than simple emotion. Sam let her cry, understanding that some things needed to be released before healing could begin. He had learned that lesson holding dying men who needed permission to let go, and he carried it through to people who needed permission to stay. When the tears finally subsided, Seraphine's voice emerged rough but stronger than before. Sam, I need to tell you something. They did not choose you randomly. They chose you because they planned to kill you during the assessment period and blame me for it. That is how disposal works. They create a situation where the subject appears dangerous, then eliminate both problems with documentation that satisfies treaty requirements. Sam absorbed this without surprise. He had suspected as much the moment Vorath described him as ideal. How do you know this? Because I heard them discussing it in Lab 7. They thought the drugs kept me unconscious, but I could still hear. They said the old human would be found dead within 72 hours, apparent victim of my instability. Then they could dispose of me as a failed experiment and dangerous subject, and the treaty would be satisfied that appropriate measures were taken. How many times have they done this before? Seraphine's glow dimmed with memory. 3. 3 other subjects paired with humans who were classified as expendable. All 3 died within the assessment period. All 3 were blamed on luminary instability. All 3 led to new restrictions on integration protocols that gave the Council more control. Sam's hands curled into fists. In Gulf War, Command had occasionally used soldiers as bait, expendable assets to draw out enemy positions. He had hated it then. He hated it more now, directed at a woman who had done nothing except survive attempts to erase her. His voice came out flat. Ma'am, I have bad news for the Council. I am very difficult to kill. Seraphine's luminescent eyes searched his face. You believe we can survive this? I believe we have 72 hours to figure out why they want you dead badly enough to arrange this elaborate disposal. And I believe that whatever the reason is, it is important enough that they are willing to violate treaty protocols to make it happen. He stood, joints protesting, and moved to the window. Question is, what makes you so dangerous that systematic murder becomes their preferred option? I do not know. They have told me I am defective since I was brought to the labs as a child. Sam turned to face her. How long have you been in those labs? 20 years, maybe longer. Memory is difficult when they keep you sedated. 20 years. Long enough to erase identity, to construct whatever narrative served Council purposes. Sam had seen it before. Victims who internalized their captors' stories until fiction became the only truth they knew. He returned to his field medic kit and extracted a small notebook, the kind he had carried for logging patient vitals. I need you to tell me everything you remember from before the labs, anything at all. Seraphine's brow furrowed with concentration. Images, fragments, a large room with high ceilings, people in formal robes watching me, someone singing, a woman's voice, her hands twisted in her lap. And light. I remember light everywhere, but they told me that was a false memory, a symptom of the defect. Sam wrote quickly, his paramedic's shorthand capturing details she might not realize mattered. Large ceremonial room, formal observers, female vocalist, light sensitivity or production. The pattern suggested something far more significant than laboratory experiment. Before he could press for more details, an alarm pulsed through their quarters. Soft, insistent, the kind designed to demand attention without causing immediate panic. The door's biometric lock clicked. Someone was entering. Sam positioned himself between Seraphine and the entrance, old instincts overriding common sense. No weapons, no cover, nothing except his body and whatever element of surprise came from them, expecting a compliant janitor rather than someone who had survived CAFG. The door slid open. Chancellor Vorath stepped through, two guards flanking him, their expressions carrying the detached professionalism of people accustomed to unpleasant tasks. Vorath's gaze swept the room, taking in Seraphine's glow that still illuminated every corner. Sam's protective stance, the field medic kit arming open on the floor. His voice carried amused condescension. How unexpected. The disposal appears to have developed attachment to its keeper. Seraphine's glow flared brighter, fear translating directly into luminescence. Sam held his ground, letting his silence speak the challenge words could not safely voice. Vorath's attention fixed on Seraphine. Subject 7, you will suppress your biological dysfunction immediately. The assessment period has only just begun, and already you demonstrate the instability that necessitates disposal protocols. Sam's voice came out level. Her name is Seraphine. It has no name. It is a failed experiment designated Subject 7, and you will address it accordingly. Vorath's tone sharpened with authority accustomed to instant obedience. Your role is to provide documentation of its danger to humans, nothing more. My role, Sam said quietly, is to be her husband. That is what your ceremony declared. So unless the council wants to admit their bonding protocols are theater without meaning, you will address her with the respect her position requires. The guards tensed, hands moving toward weapons. Vorath raised one hand to still them, his expression shifting into something closer to interest than anger. Fascinating. They said you were compliant, broken even, a maintenance worker who had accepted his irrelevance. He moved closer, studying Sam the way one might examine an insect that had unexpectedly demonstrated complex behavior. What changed, Samuel Harrison? Sam met his gaze without flinching. Nothing changed. I have always been exactly what I am. And what is that? Someone who does not leave people behind. Vorath's laugh carried no humor. How admirable, how ultimately futile. He gestured towards Seraphine, whose glow had begun to pulse with increasing agitation. Look at it, human. Look at the instability, the biological dysfunction that makes it unsuitable for integration or survival. Within 72 hours, that dysfunction will manifest in violence you cannot control. The assessment will conclude with your death and its disposal, and the treaty will be satisfied that all appropriate measures were attempted. Sam's jaw tightened. Unless the assessment concludes that the bond is viable and functional, that outcome is not available to you. Because you have already decided it is not. Because whatever Seraphine actually is, it threatens something you want to keep hidden. Sam took one step forward, military bearing replacing janitor deference. I may be a maintenance worker, Chancellor, but I spent enough time in combat to recognize an execution when I see one. So let me be clear, I will not make this easy for you. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Vorath's expression hardened into something ancient and cold. The kind of authority that had crushed resistance for longer than human civilization had existed. His voice dropped to something barely above whisper. You have 70 hours remaining, human. Use them to make peace with whatever gods your species pretends exist. Because when this assessment period concludes, you will die badly, and the disposal will watch. And both of you will serve as examples of what happens when integration attempts exceed appropriate boundaries. He turned toward the door, then paused. One additional detail: the quarters are monitored, the corridors are patrolled. Any attempt to leave will be considered breach of assessment protocol and will result in immediate termination of both subjects. You are confined here until the period expires or circumstances necessitate earlier intervention. The door sealed behind him, biometric lock engaging with a finality that sounded like a tomb closing. Sam stood motionless for 10 seconds, counting his heartbeat, waiting for the adrenaline spike to settle into something he could use. Behind him, Seraphine's breathing came fast and shallow, panic building towards something that would trigger response from whatever monitoring system Varath had referenced. He turned and moved back to the platform where she sat, her glow now pulsing erratically. "Ma'am, I need you to listen to me." She shook her head, hands pressed against her chest. "He is right. I will get you killed. You should demand annulment before the 70 hours expire." "Not happening. Sam, you do not understand what they will do." "I understand perfectly." He knelt again, bringing himself to eye level, making sure she could see the certainty in his expression. "They are going to try to kill us both. They are going to monitor our every move. They are going to wait for you to demonstrate the instability they have spent 20 years programming into you." His voice softened. "But here is what they do not understand, ma'am. I have spent 34 years surviving people who wanted me dead. And every single time I survived because I focused on the mission, not the threat." Seraphine's glow steadied slightly. "What mission?" "Figuring out why they are so desperate to erase you that they are willing to violate treaty protocols and murder a human citizen." Sam pulled out his notebook again. "You said you remember fragments from before the labs. A ceremonial room, formal observers, female vocalist. I need you to tell me everything else, no matter how small. I do not see how memories matter when we are trapped here waiting to die. They matter because whoever you were before the labs is exactly what Vorath wants buried. And if we can figure out who that was, we might have leverage that keeps us both breathing." He tapped the notebook. "So start talking, Your Majesty. We have 70 hours to solve a 20-year-old mystery, and I do not intend to waste a single minute of it." Seraphine stared at him, confusion and fragile hope warring across features that had forgotten how to process either. Then slowly she began to speak. The memories came in fragments, jagged pieces of a life Seraphine had been taught to forget. She spoke haltingly at first, her luminescent eyes unfocused as she reached for images buried under 20 years of chemical suppression. Sam listened without interrupting, his pen moving across notebook pages in the shorthand he had developed for triage situations where seconds mattered and documentation meant the difference between life and death. The ceremonial room had been vast, she said, its ceiling disappearing into shadows that no light could penetrate. She remembered standing on a raised platform while hundreds of faces turned toward her, their expressions expectant in ways she could not parse with a child's understanding. The woman singing had possessed a voice that made the air itself vibrate, words in a language Seraphine should have understood but could not now recall. And the light had been everywhere, not from external sources but emanating from her own skin, so bright that even the shadows seemed to glow. Sam's pen paused. "How old were you?" 5, maybe 6. Time is difficult to measure when everything after exists only in sedated fragments. "And this ceremony, was it celebratory or somber?" Seraphine's brow furrowed with concentration. "Celebratory. I remember feeling joy around me, people pleased about something. But also fear. The adults were afraid even while they smiled." Sam wrote quickly. "Childhood ceremony, public event. Subject demonstrates significant bioluminescence. Adult anxiety despite positive occasion." The pattern suggested something monumental, the kind of event that marked transitions of power or legitimacy. Coronation, succession, the formal presentation of an heir. He looked up from his notebook. "Seraphine, do you remember your parents?" The question struck her like a physical blow. Her glow flickered, dimming and brightening in rapid succession that spoke to emotional turbulence beyond simple memory. "I was told I was created in the labs, grown from genetic material, that I had no parents. But that is not what you remember." Her hands twisted in her lap. I remember a woman with silver skin who sang to me before sleep, a man who carried me on his shoulders through gardens that smelled like rainfall. But they told me those were false memories, implantation errors from the growth process. Sam had heard similar stories in Chicago, victims convinced their own experiences were fabrications because authority had declared them impossible. The human mind could be manipulated into doubting its own reality, but the body remembered. Trauma left marks that no amount of gaslighting could completely erase. He stood and moved to the window, studying the courtyard below where guards patrolled in patterns he had already memorized during his 2 years of invisible observation. 3-hour rotation, 4 guard teams, shift change at 0600 and 1800 hours. Old habits from forward operating base Viper, where knowing patrol patterns meant surviving mortar attacks that came with predictable regularity. "Ma'am, I need to leave these quarters." Seraphine's glow flared with alarm. Vorath said any attempt to leave would result in immediate termination. He said any attempt you or I make to leave would trigger that response. He did not account for the fact that I have been navigating this embassy for 2 years without anyone noticing I exist. Sam turned from the window, his weathered face settling into the kind of determined calm that had carried him through situations where panic meant death. "There is an archive room on level 7. I have seen diplomatic staff access it when they think no one is watching. If your memories are real, if you truly are someone important enough that they needed to erase you completely, there will be records." The corridors are monitored. Guards patrol constantly. During daylight hours, yes, but between 0200 and 0400, staffing drops to minimum levels. Most of the guards are stationed at external checkpoints, not internal corridors. He pulled his maintenance uniform from where it had been folded on a chair, the gray fabric that had made him invisible for 24 months. And maintenance workers are expected to move through the building at all hours. It is what we do. Seraphine rose from the platform, her glow casting shadows that danced across obsidian walls. "If they catch you, they will kill you immediately. No assessment period, no documentation. You will simply disappear." "Ma'am, I have been disappearing my entire adult life. The difference now is I am disappearing with purpose." He checked his field medic kit, confirming the supplies that might prove necessary if things went badly. "I need you to stay here. Keep your glow steady but not alarming. If anyone checks on you, tell them I am in the bathroom. Buy me whatever time you can." "Sam, please, this is too dangerous." He paused at the door, his hand resting on the biometric panel he had already determined could be bypassed with the maintenance override code every janitor possessed. "Seraphine, in Gulf War I learned that the most dangerous thing you can do is nothing. Waiting for the enemy to act means dying on their timeline instead of yours. So I am going to go find out who you really are, and then we are going to use that information to make sure both of us see our 73. The biometric lock clicked open when he entered the override code, a small confirmation that his maintenance access still functioned despite his new status as experimental subject. Sam slipped into the corridor beyond, letting the door seal behind him with a whisper that barely disturbed the embassy's nighttime silence. Level 3 stood empty, its polished floors reflecting emergency lighting that activated after standard hours to conserve energy and maintain the illusion of a building at rest. Sam moved with the unhurried pace of someone performing routine tasks, his maintenance uniform providing camouflage more effective than any tactical gear. Security cameras tracked his passage, but their monitoring stations were staffed by guards who had watched him traverse these corridors for 2 years without ever registering his presence as worthy of attention. The maintenance access shaft that connected level 3 to level 7 occupied a corner most people never noticed, hidden behind a utility panel that required tools Sam carried in pockets designed for exactly this purpose. He worked quickly, removing the panel and slipping into the shaft's narrow confines, pulling the panel back into place behind him with practiced efficiency. Darkness swallowed him whole. Sam descended using maintenance ladder rungs that were spaced too far apart for luminary proportions, but perfectly suited to human dimensions, a small architectural oversight that had always struck him as deliberate. The embassy had been designed with human workers in mind, built during the treaty's early years, when integration still carried optimistic assumptions about mutual cooperation. Now those design choices provided pathways for someone who knew how to exploit the spaces between official access and actual security. Level 7 smelled different from the upper floors, its air carrying chemical traces that suggested laboratory work and biological storage. Sam paused at the shaft's exit point, listening for patrol patterns, counting seconds between the soft footfalls that marked guard positions. 3 guards, rotating pattern, 20-second window between passes. He waited for the gap and emerged into a corridor lined with doors that bore no identifying markers, just biometric panels and numeric designations. Archive Room C7 occupied the section where he had once observed a diplomatic attaché accessing records during what they thought were private hours. The door's biometric lock represented a problem, but maintenance access existed for emergencies, and Sam had long ago memorized the override sequences that supposedly required administrative approval. The lock disengaged after 15 seconds of careful manipulation. Inside, Archive Room C7 stretched into darkness, broken only by the soft glow of preservation fields that protected physical documents from decay. Holographic storage occupied the room's center, projectors designed to display three-dimensional records with audio accompaniment. Sam had cleaned these rooms enough times to know their basic operation, had watched diplomatic staff interact with controls while he mopped floors they never bothered to notice. He approached the primary console and began searching, using keywords Seraphine had provided. Ceremonial, child, royal presentation. The system responded slowly, processing queries through security protocols designed to flag unusual access patterns. Sam worked with the knowledge that he had perhaps 10 minutes before automated systems alerted someone that maintenance personnel were accessing records far beyond their clearance level. The first file materialized with audio that nearly made him flinch. A woman's voice singing in luminary language, the same voice Seraphine had described. The hologram showed a vast throne room, its architecture matching the fragments she had remembered. Hundreds of formally dressed luminary watching a small child stand on a platform, while light poured from her skin in waves that seemed to make the very air luminous. Sam's breath caught. The child was unmistakably Seraphine. Her features softened by youth but carrying the same bone structure, the same luminescent eyes that now watched him from quarters 3 floors above. She wore robes that marked her as someone significant, standing between 2 adults whose silver skin and elaborate dress identified them as authority beyond question. The woman singing finished her performance and stepped aside. The male adult, tall and commanding, lifted the child onto his shoulders while the crowd erupted in what could only be described as celebration. His voice carried across decades, preserved in holographic format that made history feel immediate. Seraphine, daughter of Therion and Lysara, heir to the luminary throne, may your light guide our people toward peace and prosperity for generations yet unborn. Sam's hands tightened on the console edge. Seraphine was not a laboratory experiment. She was a princess, the heir, the rightful ruler of a civilization that had spent 20 years erasing her existence. He searched deeper, pulling files that documented the weeks following that ceremonial presentation. The entries painted a picture of political tension, factions within luminary leadership who opposed the royal family's push for genuine integration with humanity. Chancellor Varath appeared repeatedly in security reports, his name associated with the groups advocating for luminary supremacy and controlled human subjugation rather than equal partnership. Then came the final entries, security logs from 20 years ago, stamped with timestamps that placed them in the hours after midnight. Royal quarters breached, multiple casualties, air status unknown, investigation pending. But there had been no investigation. The files showed cursory documentation, followed by official declarations that the royal family had died in an unfortunate accident involving experimental technology. The heir's body had been recovered and given appropriate funeral rites. The council had assumed temporary governance pending the identification of suitable succession candidates. All lies. Sam pulled the final file, the one that should have documented the heir's funeral. Instead, it contained a single video recording, encrypted with security protocols that suggested someone had hidden it deliberately for future discovery. The video showed Lab 7, its equipment newer but recognizably the same space where Sam had first seen Seraphine drugged and dying. A much younger Vorath stood over an examination table where a small child lay unconscious, her skin glowing faintly despite obvious sedation. Guards stood nearby, their expressions uncertain. Vorath's voice carried cold authority. The heir lives, but she must not. However, treaty protocols require documentation for any luminary deaths on sovereign territory, and the human government has begun asking questions about the royal family's accident. We cannot simply dispose of the child without raising suspicions that would compromise our position. One of the guards spoke hesitantly. Then what do you propose, Chancellor? We erase her, chemically suppress her royal markers. Document her as a laboratory specimen. Subject 7, a failed attempt at genetic engineering. Keep her sedated and controlled until such time as we can arrange a disposal that satisfies treaty requirements without connecting her to the royal bloodline. And if the suppression fails? If her true nature emerges? Vorath's smile carried no warmth. Then we ensure she dies in a way that justifies our claims of instability. 20 years should provide ample time to arrange appropriate circumstances. The video ended. Sam stood in the archive's darkness, fury building in his chest with an intensity he had not allowed himself since forward operating base Viper. When command had sent Martinez's unit into an ambush everyone knew was coming. Political calculation disguised as military necessity. Expendable assets sacrificed to maintain comfortable lives. He downloaded the files onto a data chip his maintenance kit contained for diagnostic purposes, working quickly while his mind processed tactical considerations. This evidence proved everything. Vorath's conspiracy, the assassination, Seraphine's true identity. But evidence alone would not keep them alive if they could not broadcast it beyond the embassy's controlled information networks. Footsteps approached in the corridor outside. Sam moved away from the console, killing the holographic display and positioning himself near a storage unit that would provide cover if the door opened. The footsteps paused directly outside Archive Room C7. Someone tested the door's biometric lock, finding it already disengaged. The door slid open. A young luminary guard stood in the threshold, his weapon drawn but not raised, his expression cycling through surprise and something that looked almost like relief. He could not have been more than 25 in human years, his purple skin still carrying the slight luminescence that marked youth not yet fully matured into adult coloration. His voice came out barely above a whisper. You are the human, the one they bonded to Subject 7. Sam's hands stayed visible, his posture non-threatening despite every instinct screaming to secure the weapon before it could be used. I am just a maintenance worker looking for cleaning supplies. In an archive room, at 3 in the morning, after accessing files about the royal assassination. The guard lowered his weapon completely, which somehow felt more dangerous than if he had kept it raised. My name is Marcus, and I have been waiting 20 years for someone to look at those files. Sam's eyes narrowed. You are going to need to explain that. Marcus glanced into the corridor, confirming they remained alone, then stepped fully into the archive and let the door seal behind him. I was 5 years old when Chancellor Vorath murdered the royal family. My father was Captain Therion's personal guard, He died protecting the heir, buying time for her to be hidden before the assassins could reach her. His voice carried weight beyond his years. I watched from a ventilation shaft where my father had concealed me. I saw everything. The murder, the cover-up. Vorath's guards dragging away a small child who would not stop glowing even though they kept injecting her with suppressants. And you have been silent for 20 years? I was a child, alone. Everyone who might have protected me was dead or complicit, so I survived the only way I could. I joined the embassy guard. I stayed quiet. I waited. Marcus met Sam's gaze with intensity that suggested old pain never fully healed. And I searched for any sign that the heir lived. But Vorath was thorough. Subject 7 existed in sealed labs, accessible only to council members and approved researchers. I could not reach her, could not even confirm she was the same child. Until 3 days ago, when they forced her into a marriage ceremony. Until then, Marcus's expression hardened. They are planning to kill you both during the assessment period. Frame it as instability. Use your deaths to justify new restrictions on human luminary integration and tighten the council's control. But if Seraphine could be proven as the rightful heir, if evidence of the assassination could be broadcast beyond the embassy's information networks, Vorath's authority would collapse. Sam pulled the data chip from his pocket. I have the evidence. Video of Vorath ordering her erasure. Documentation of the assassination. Her ceremonial presentation is air. Everything needed to prove who she is and what he did. Marcus stared at the chip as if it held salvation or damnation in equal measure. That changes everything. But we still face the problem of broadcast. All communication systems in the embassy route through council-controlled servers. Any attempt to transmit externally will be blocked and traced within seconds. What about the coronation ceremony Varath mentioned? The one happening in 48 hours. He plans to crown himself as king, claiming the council has identified him as the most suitable successor after exhaustive deliberation. The ceremony will be public, attended by human diplomats and media representatives. It will formalize his authority and make any challenge to his rule appear as treason against legitimate governance. Marcus moved to the console and pulled up scheduling files. But if Seraphine could appear at that ceremony, if she could demonstrate her royal markers in front of witnesses Vorath cannot silence, the entire narrative collapses. Sam's tactical mind processed the variables. 48 hours, embassy lockdown, monitored movements, 2 guards versus an entire security force. And Seraphine, who had spent 20 years learning to believe she was worthless and dangerous, somehow needing to reclaim an identity that had been systematically destroyed. We need more than just the 2 of us. Marcus nodded slowly. There are others, loyalists who remember the true royal family, staff members who have watched Vorath's corruption grow and stayed silent because speaking meant death. 15, maybe 20 people scattered throughout the embassy who would act if they believed the heir truly lived. Can you gather them without alerting Vorath's security network? Yes, but it will take time, and we have less than 48 hours before the coronation. Sam checked his watch, calculating the minutes already spent in the archive, and the window remaining before his absence from quarters would trigger investigation. Gather whoever you can trust absolutely. Meet me in the maintenance sublevel, Section D, tomorrow at 0200. And bring anyone with technical expertise who can help us access the ceremony's broadcast systems. What will you do? Convince a woman who has been taught her entire conscious life that she is a failed experiment to remember she is actually a queen. Sam moved toward the door, listening for patrol patterns, and figure out how to keep us both alive long enough to make it matter. Marcus caught his arm, the gesture carrying urgency beyond simple caution. Human, there is something else. The reason Vorath is rushing the coronation. We intercepted coded transmissions yesterday. He has mobilized the war fleet. Sam froze. War fleet? Luminary military vessels, 200 ships in orbital position above Earth. They have been there since the treaty was signed, supposedly as defense against external threats, but Vorath has activated them and placed their commanders on alert status. Marcus's voice dropped. He plans to use your deaths as justification for hostilities. The human janitor murdered by an unstable luminary subject. The heir dying in the tragic aftermath. Sufficient cause to declare the treaty void and begin military operations against what he will frame as human aggression. The implications crash down like artillery at Kafji. This was not just about Seraphine's survival or Sam's life. Vorath intended to use their deaths as the trigger for interplanetary war. How long until the fleet can begin attacks? 72 hours from activation order, which means Marcus's expression went grim. He issued the order yesterday. The fleet will be ready to fire exactly when your assessment period expires. Sam's hands curled into fists. Martinez had died because command decided a dozen lives were acceptable losses for territorial gain. The math never changed, just the scale. Now, instead of 12 soldiers, Vorath was willing to sacrifice millions for power. Tomorrow night, 0200 Section D. Sam opened the door, checked the corridor, and slipped into darkness that felt heavier than it had minutes before. And Marcus, bring anyone who knows how to stop a war fleet. The return journey through maintenance shafts took longer than the descent, complicated by the weight of knowledge that transformed personal survival into something far larger. Sam emerged onto level 3 with minutes remaining before shift change would increase guard presence beyond what his maintenance cover could plausibly explain. He entered his quarters to find Seraphine standing at the window, her glow illuminating the entire space with anxiety that had clearly been building during his absence. She turned when the door sealed, relief and anger warring across her luminescent features. 6 hours. You were gone for 6 hours. I thought they had killed you. They tried very hard not to notice me, which bought time. Sam moved to the small table and placed the data chip where she could see it. Seraphine, I need you to sit down. Why, what did you find? Proof of everything, who you are, what they did, why they are so desperate to erase you that they are willing to start a war. She sat slowly, her glow pulsing with the kind of agitation that came from hope fighting against learned helplessness. Sam pulled up the ceremonial video on his portable diagnostic tablet, the screen small but sufficient to display the child standing between silver-skinned adults, while a woman's voice sang and light poured from her skin. Seraphine watched without speaking, her hands pressed against her mouth as if holding back sounds that might escape otherwise. When the male adult lifted the child onto his shoulders and declared her heir to the luminary throne, a sob broke through her fingers. That is real? Not false memory? That is real. Sam advanced the recording to show the man's face more clearly. Do you recognize him? The man who carried me through gardens. The one who sang off key and made Mother laugh. Her voice cracked. My father. Sam let the video play through the final moments of celebration before switching to the security footage from Lab 7. Seraphine watched Vorath order her erasure, watched guards inject sedatives into the unconscious child on the examination table, watched 20 years of conspiracy unfold in encrypted documentation that someone had preserved despite enormous risk. When the video ended, Seraphine sat motionless for long seconds that stretched into minutes. Her glow had dimmed to almost nothing, all her bioluminescence redirected inward to process trauma that had been validated rather than dismissed. Finally, she spoke. They killed my parents, took my identity, convinced me I was nothing, and I believed them. You were a child, alone, drugged. You survived the only way you could. I should have remembered, should have fought back. Should have. Sam's voice cut through her spiral with the same firm authority he had used to stop Marines from bleeding out in a rocky desert. You were 5 years old, ma'am. What happened to you was not failure. It was systematic abuse designed to break you completely. The fact that you are sitting here now, still capable of feeling anything, is not weakness. It is the most stubborn strength I have ever witnessed. Seraphine's glow flickered back to life. Vorath said I have 70 hours before disposal. 64 now, given how long you were gone. 48 until the coronation ceremony, where he crowns himself king and activates a war fleet to attack Earth. Sam pulled up Marcus's file on his tablet. This guard contacted me in the archive. His father died protecting you. He has spent 20 years waiting for a chance to help the real heir. He is gathering loyalists who will act if we can get you to that ceremony. I cannot appear at a coronation. I am Subject 7. Failed experiment. I do not know how to be a queen. You are Seraphine, daughter of Therion and Lysara, and you have 48 hours to remember. Sam's voice softened slightly. But first, you need to learn how to control the power they spent 2 decades suppressing. Because when we walk into that throne room, you are going to need to be everything they tried to destroy. The hours that followed blurred into exhausted determination. Sam worked with Seraphine using the same techniques he had applied teaching panicked civilians to perform emergency first aid during Chicago's worst violence. Break the task into manageable pieces. Practice until muscle memory overrides conscious thought. Build confidence through repetition rather than expectation. Her bioluminescence responded to emotional states, which meant learning to control the glow required learning to control the emotions themselves. Sam taught her breathing patterns from combat stress management, techniques that redirected adrenaline into focused energy rather than panic. He walked her through visualization exercises, helping her understand that power was not inherently dangerous just because it made others uncomfortable. By dawn, she could maintain steady luminescence through deliberate concentration. By midday, she could pulse the light in patterns that suggested communication rather than random biological response. By evening, she could dim and brighten at will, transforming what had been involuntary reaction into conscious choice. Sam watched her practice with the satisfaction of someone who had spent a lifetime teaching others to survive impossible situations. You are learning faster than I expected. Seraphine's glow steadied into something calmer than he had yet seen from her. I spent 20 years fighting this. Now that I am allowing it, everything feels easier. That is generally how survival works. Fighting yourself takes more energy than fighting actual threats. Sam checked his watch. 2,200 hours. 3 hours until his meeting with Marcus. I need to leave again tonight. Briefly, can you maintain what we have practiced if someone checks on you? Where are you going? To meet with people who want to help us not die horribly. He moved to the door, then paused. Seraphine, I need you to understand something. When we walk into that ceremony tomorrow, there is a very real possibility I will not walk out. Vorath needs me dead to justify his war. My role in all of this is to make sure you survive to stop him. Her glow flared brightly. No, we both survive or neither of us goes. That is not how triage works, ma'am. You are the heir. Your survival matters more than mine. You are wrong. She stood, crossing to where he waited by the door, her luminescence casting shadows that made her features seem older, more regal. You told me in Gulf War you learned the most dangerous thing you can do is nothing. You taught me that fighting yourself costs more than fighting real threats. Now I am teaching you something. I will not become queen by accepting that good people are expendable. My parents died trying to build peace. I will not honor their memory by treating your life as less valuable than my own. Sam met her luminescent gaze and saw a determination that had not existed 3 days ago, strength emerging from someone who had been taught she possessed none. You are going to make a good queen. We will discuss that after we both survive. She gestured toward the door. Go meet your loyalists. Learn how to stop a war. I will be here practicing how to be terrifying. Maintenance Sublevel Section D occupied the embassy's lowest point, built into bedrock beneath the main structure to house mechanical systems that require deep earth cooling. Sam descended through access shafts that carried the weight of 4 floors above him. The confined spaces triggering memories of tunnel networks in Gulf War, where every shadow might hide an enemy and every sound demanded instant assessment. The sublevel stretched in multiple directions, its corridors lined with pipes and conduits that hummed with the embassy's life support systems. Marcus waited near a junction where 3 passages converged, his guard uniform replaced with maintenance coveralls that provided the same invisibility Sam had relied on for 2 years. 17 others stood with him. Sam counted quickly, assessing the faces that ranged from young to elderly, their expressions carrying varying degrees of hope and terror. Most wore the plain clothing of embassy support staff. 2 carried the bearing of former military. 1 elderly female possessed silver skin that marked her as someone significant despite her current position among servants. Marcus stepped forward. Samuel Harrison, these are the loyalists. Everyone here remembers the true royal family. Everyone here has waited for a chance to act. The elderly female moved closer, her eyes searching Sam's face with intensity that suggested she was looking for something specific. When she spoke, her voice carried authority that age had weathered but not diminished. You are the human bonded to the heir, the one who found the archive evidence. Yes, ma'am. Show me your hands. Sam extended both hands, uncertain what she sought. The female examined them carefully, noting the calluses from maintenance work, the slight tremor that came from holding wounded soldiers while they died, the old scars from a dozen emergencies that had required him to work with broken glass or twisted metal. She nodded slowly. These are hands that saved lives. Therian chose well. Ma'am, Therian did not choose me. The council forced a marriage as part of a disposal protocol. Therian chose you 20 years ago when he designed the emergency protocols that would protect his daughter. He specified that if she was ever in mortal danger, the embassy systems should select a human-bonded mate based on 3 criteria: medical training, combat experience, and moral character that prioritized protecting others above personal safety. The elderly female's smile carried sadness that transcended species. The council thought they were arranging disposal. They did not realize they were activating the late king's final safeguard. Sam absorbed this information, processing implications that transformed coincidence into deliberate protection. You are saying the marriage was not random. Nothing about you was random, Samuel Harrison. You were selected because you are exactly the kind of person Therion knew his daughter would need if the worst came to pass. She gestured to the others gathered in the sublevel. My name is Elena. I was Queen Lysara's chief advisor. These people are what remains of the royal household, scattered throughout the embassy in positions Varath considered too insignificant to threaten his power. Marcus pulled up schematics on a portable display. The coronation ceremony occurs in the Grand Hall, upper level. Vorath has scheduled it for maximum visibility. Human media, diplomatic corps, full council attendance. He will crown himself at 1400 hours, exactly when Samuel Harrison's assessment period expires, which means the disposal becomes part of the ceremony. Public demonstration of luminary justice. Sam studied the schematics, his tactical mind mapping entry points and security choke points. How do we get Seraphine into that hall? Elena spoke carefully. The ceremony includes a traditional challenge period. Any luminary may contest the succession if they possess legitimate royal claim. It is an ancient custom, rarely invoked, but still embedded in treaty protocols that Varath cannot simply ignore without revealing his illegitimacy. So we wait for the challenge period, and Seraphine steps forward and is immediately killed by Varath's guards before she can complete the formal challenge. Elena's expression hardened. Unless she has protection, unless she enters with supporters who can hold security forces at bay long enough for her to demonstrate her royal markers and speak her claim. Marcus indicated positions on the schematic. 17 of us can position ourselves throughout the hall during the ceremony. Not enough to fight Vorath's security directly, but enough to create confusion and buy time. Time for what? Sam asked. For her to glow. Elena's voice carried certainty. Royal bioluminescence is distinctive, unmistakable. Once witnessed, it cannot be denied. If Seraphine can demonstrate her markers in front of human witnesses and diplomatic corps, Vorath cannot simply kill her without exposing his entire conspiracy. Sam's mind worked through the tactical sequence. We need to control the broadcast systems. Make sure every camera in that hall captures what happens and transmits it beyond the embassy's internal networks. One of the former military operatives stepped forward, his purple skin marked with scars that suggested long service. I can access the media control room, route the feeds directly to human news networks and satellite uplinks. But I will need 15 minutes minimum to establish stable connections that Vorath's people cannot immediately shut down. Which means we need a distraction that gives you 15 minutes. Sam looked at the assembled loyalists, seeing in their faces the same exhausted determination he had carried through forward operating base Viper. And we need to make absolutely certain that when Seraphine steps forward, she looks and sounds like a queen, not a laboratory subject they have spent 20 years destroying. Elena moved closer. May I see her? The heir? She is confined to quarters on level 3, monitored constantly. Then bring me there. I served her mother for 40 years. If anyone can help her remember who she truly is, it is someone who knew her family. Sam nodded slowly. Tonight, after the guard shift changes at 0200. Marcus, can you create a diversion that gives us a clear path? Yes, fire alarm in the West Wing. Requires full security response under embassy protocols. Should give you 30 minutes before they realize it is false. 30 minutes. Sam looked at each of the loyalists in turn. Tomorrow at 1300 hours, everyone positions themselves in the Grand Hall for the ceremony. Act natural. Follow normal protocols. When Seraphine makes her challenge, your only job is to stay alive and bear witness. Do not engage Vorath's guards directly unless absolutely necessary. We survive by making sure the truth gets broadcast, not by winning fights we cannot win. The assembled group dispersed in small clusters, returning to their regular duties with the understanding that tomorrow would either end Vorath's conspiracy or kill everyone in this sublevel. Elena remained behind, her silver skin catching the dim emergency lighting in ways that reminded Sam of Seraphine's glow. You care for her. Not a question. An observation delivered with the certainty of someone who had spent decades reading political currents and personal motivations. I care about keeping her alive long enough to stop a war. That is not what I asked, human. Sam's jaw tightened. I am 68 years old, ma'am. I spent my life learning how to save people and failing more often than I succeeded. Seraphine is someone who deserves better than what she has received. That is as complicated as it needs to be. Elena's smile carried understanding that transcended language barriers. Therian would have liked you. He believed the measure of a person existed in what they did when no one was watching and no reward was offered. You chose to help his daughter when doing so meant death and silence meant survival. That is the kind of character he hoped to find in humanity. I am just a maintenance worker who got unlucky. You are a warrior who got exactly where he needed to be. She moved toward the access shaft that would carry her back to upper levels. Tomorrow, Samuel Harrison, you will help crown a queen. Try not to die before that happens. Sam returned to level 3 as the embassy's overnight lighting engaged, casting corridors in the reddish glow that marked luminary rest periods. Seraphine stood at the window when he entered, her own luminescence dimmed but steady, her posture carrying more confidence than he had seen since the forced ceremony. She turned as the door sealed. Did you find help? 17 loyalists who have been waiting 20 years for this moment, your mother's chief advisor, a plan that might work if we survive the next 18 hours. Sam moved to the small food dispenser and pulled nutrition packets that tasted like recycled cardboard, but kept bodies functional. And information about why you and I ended up bonded. He explained while they ate, describing Therian's emergency protocols and the selection criteria that had identified Sam as suitable protection for a daughter the king had known might someday face mortal danger. Seraphine listened without interrupting, her glow pulsing in patterns that suggested processing far beyond simple comprehension. When he finished, she sat quietly for several minutes before speaking. My father planned for me to survive even after his death. He built safeguards into systems Varath thought he controlled completely, and those safeguards led to you. Apparently. Sam, do you believe in fate? I believe in making the best choice available in any given moment and hoping it matters. He met her luminescent gaze. Your father gave you a chance. I am trying to make sure that chance becomes survival. Everything else is just philosophical discussion that will not matter if we die tomorrow. Seraphine's smile carried sadness and hope in equal measure. He would have liked you. My father. He valued people who acted rather than debated. Then let us hope I can help you honor his memory by staying alive long enough to take his throne back from the man who murdered him. The hours before dawn passed in restless preparation. Sam walked Seraphine through what to expect during the ceremony, using his knowledge of diplomatic protocols and Elena's instructions. The challenge period would come after Varath accepted the crown, but before final vows were spoken. Seraphine would need to step forward, demonstrate her royal markers, and speak the formal words that claimed succession rights. They practiced the words until she could deliver them without hesitation. I am Seraphine, daughter of Therian and Lysara, rightful heir to the luminary throne. I challenge this coronation and claim my inheritance. Sam taught her how to project authority through posture rather than volume, how to hold eye contact with people who wanted her dead, how to remember that fear and courage were not in opposites, but companions that traveled together through every situation worth facing. At 0400, exhaustion finally forced them to rest. Sam took position near the door, his field medic kit within reach, and his body positioned to intercept any threat that might enter. Seraphine curled on the cushioned platform, her glow dimmed to barely perceptible luminescence that made her seem almost human in the darkness. Her voice drifted through the quiet. Sam, if something goes wrong tomorrow, if Vorath kills you before I can challenge him, then you challenge him anyway. You tell the truth. You let Elena and Marcus handle the rest. That is not what I was going to say. She shifted position, her glow brightening enough to cast shadows. I was going to say thank you for seeing me when everyone else looked away, for treating me like a person when they taught me I was just a failed experiment, for giving me a reason to want to survive. Sam's throat tightened with emotions he had not allowed himself since Ellen's funeral. You are going to be a remarkable queen, Seraphine, and I am going to do everything in my power to make sure you get that chance. Silence settled between them, comfortable despite everything it contained. Sleep came eventually, brief and troubled, filled with dreams of forward operating base Viper and Chicago emergency rooms and throne rooms burning, while a small child glowed bright enough to blind. Sam woke at 1000 to the sound of alarms. Not the soft pulses that marked routine notifications. Full embassy alert, klaxons screaming through walls with the urgency of crisis that demanded immediate response. Seraphine jerked upright, her glow flaring to maximum brightness in instinctive reaction to perceived threat. Sam moved to the door, listening for sounds beyond the sealed entrance. Running footsteps, shouted orders in luminary language. The distinctive charge of energy weapons being activated. The door's biometric lock disengaged. Marcus burst through, his guard uniform torn and blood staining his shoulder. His voice came out in gasps. They know. Vorath knows about the archive access, the loyalist meeting, everything. He has moved the coronation up. Not tomorrow, now. 1400 hours became 1100. Ceremony starts in 45 minutes. Sam's hands curled into fists. How did he find out? Security detected your archive access. Took them this long to decrypt the logs and trace your movements. Vorath issued emergency orders. Lock down the embassy, arrest all suspected loyalists, and execute you both immediately. Marcus's gaze fixed on Seraphine. Your Majesty, we are out of time. If we are going to challenge him, it has to be now, before he crowns himself and activates the war fleet. Seraphine stood, her glow pulsing with fear that was transforming into something harder. How many loyalists were arrested? 7. The rest scattered before security could move. Elena is in the Grand Hall with the media crew. She has 10 minutes to reroute the broadcast systems before Vorath's people lock her out completely. Sam grabbed his field medic kit and checked the embassy schematics he had memorized during 2 years of invisible maintenance work. What is the fastest route to the Grand Hall from here? Main corridors are sealed. Security checkpoints at every junction. They are hunting specifically for you two. Marcus pulled out a guard access card. But the service passages are still clear. They do not think maintenance workers matter enough to monitor closely. The service passages that I have been navigating for 2 years. Sam's smile held no humor. Should have paid more attention to the invisible people, Chancellor. They moved quickly, abandoning the quarters that had served as both sanctuary and prison. The corridor outside stood empty, evidence of embassy-wide security mobilization that had pulled guards towards central choke points and left peripheral areas exposed. Sam led them into a service access shaft, his body memory guiding movements through spaces he had cleaned and maintained, while people overhead conducted diplomacy that never noticed him. Seraphine followed closely, her glow dimmed but steady, her breathing controlled despite circumstances that should have triggered panic. Sam heard her counting under her breath, practicing the breathing patterns he had taught her, preparing herself for the confrontation that would either restore her throne or end both their lives. The service passages eventually connected to the Grand Hall's lower level, emerging in a storage area where diplomatic supplies waited between ceremonial uses. Sam paused at the threshold, listening to sounds that filtered through ceiling panels, crowd murmurs, the formal tones of officials preparing for significant events, the mechanical adjustments of camera equipment being positioned. Marcus checked his communication device. Elena has established external broadcast links. Every camera in that hall will transmit directly to human news networks, but Vorath's technical people are trying to shut her down. She has maybe 5 minutes before they succeed. Then we have 5 minutes to get Seraphine onto that stage and let her speak her challenge. Sam looked at Seraphine, seeing determination that had replaced the frightened laboratory subject from 3 days ago. Are you ready? Her glow brightened until shadows fled from every corner. I am the daughter of Therion and Lysara. I am the rightful heir to the luminary throne, and I am going to make my father proud. Sam nodded once. Then let us go crown a queen. They ascended the final stairs that led to the Grand Hall's floor level, emerging into a space designed for exactly this kind of ceremony. 500 seats filled with diplomatic corps and media representatives. 20 cameras positioned to capture every angle. Chancellor Vorath, standing on an elevated platform, crown of office resting on a ceremonial cushion beside him, his expression carrying the satisfaction of someone whose victory was moments from completion. The crown touched his silver skin as formal words echoed through the hall. By the authority vested in the council and witnessed by assembled representatives of Earth and Luminary, I accept the throne and responsibilities of... Seraphine stepped into the main aisle. Her bioluminescence blazed with intensity that made cameras adjust exposure automatically. Light pouring from her skin in waves that seemed to make the air itself glow. Every head turned, every camera swiveled. 500 people in 20 broadcast feeds captured the moment a woman who had been declared dead 20 years ago walked toward a throne stolen through murder. Vorath's words died mid-sentence. Seraphine's voice carried across the hall with authority she had learned from Sam's teaching and reclaimed from memories her father had left behind. Clear, strong, undeniable. I am Seraphine, daughter of Therion and Lysara, rightful heir to the luminary throne. I challenge this coronation and claim my inheritance. Chaos erupted in waves that threatened to overwhelm the moment entirely. Vorath's guards moved with the synchronized precision of military units trained for exactly this contingency. 12 weapons rose in unison, targeting Seraphine where she stood in the center aisle, her bioluminescence marking her as clearly as any tactical laser. The human diplomats scattered toward exits that sealed automatically under security protocols, their panicked movements captured by cameras still broadcasting to networks beyond embassy control. Sam positioned himself between Seraphine and the nearest weapons, his body serving the same function it had served at CAFG when Martinez needed 3 more minutes to reach the medevac zone. Shields did not require technology. They only required willingness to stand in the path of things designed to kill. Vorath's voice cut through the chaos with authority that had commanded obedience for 2 decades. Stand down, Subject 7. You are experiencing psychotic episode brought on by experimental instability. We will provide immediate medical intervention if you surrender peacefully. The cameras captured every word, broadcasting his lies to human networks that were already comparing current footage to archived records of the royal family. Social media exploded with speculation. News anchors struggled to provide context for events unfolding faster than verification could follow. Seraphine's glow intensified beyond anything Sam had witnessed during their practice sessions. Light poured from her skin in waves that made the Grand Hall's elaborate lighting seem dim by comparison. Her voice carried across the space with resonance that suggested something fundamental had shifted in her biology. I am not Subject 7, I am the daughter you tried to erase. I am the heir my father protected with his final breath, and I am here to reclaim what you stole through murder and lies. Vorath's expression flickered between rage and calculation. His hand moved in a gesture Sam recognized from security briefings. Executive termination order. The guards' weapons charged to lethal settings. Then Seraphine screamed, not from fear or pain, but from something deeper, power that had been suppressed for 20 years finally erupting without restraint or control. Her bioluminescence exploded outward in a shockwave that knocked guards backward, shattered camera lenses, and caused every electronic system in the Grand Hall to surge and fail simultaneously. Lights died. Broadcast feeds cut to static. Emergency lighting engaged with the sickly red glow that marked crisis protocols. Sam felt the wave hit him like physical force, driving him back 3 steps before his legs remembered how to function. His ears rang from pressure that had nothing to do with sound. When his vision cleared, Seraphine lay collapsed in the aisle, unconscious, her skin still glowing, but the light flickering irregularly like a bulb about to burn out completely. Vorath recovered faster than his guards, his ancient reflexes sharper than bodies still adapting to the power surge's aftermath. He descended from the platform with weapon drawn, moving towards Seraphine with clear intent to eliminate the threat she represented before anyone could intervene. Sam's field medic training overrode every instinct that screamed about weapons and tactical disadvantage. He lunged forward, reaching Seraphine's unconscious form half a second before Vorath arrived. His body curled over hers, protecting vital organs, the way he had learned to protect wounded Marines when no cover existed except human flesh. Vorath's weapon pressed against the base of Sam's skull. Cold, precise, positioned for execution rather than intimidation. Move aside, maintenance worker. This does not concern you. Sam's voice came out steady despite circumstances that should have made steadiness impossible. She is my wife. Your ceremony declared it. Your treaty protocols confirm it. So this concerns me considerably, Chancellor. I can kill you both. Right here. Right now. The cameras are dead. Human witnesses are evacuated. No evidence remains except my official report that an unstable subject attacked during a legitimate coronation and required immediate termination. You are wrong about the cameras, Elena's voice carried from somewhere near the media control station. External broadcast resumed 30 seconds ago. Every human network is watching this conversation. Every word you speak is being recorded for posterity. Vorath's weapon pressure increased against Sam's skull. Then they will watch me eliminate a legitimate threat to embassy security. They will watch you murder an unarmed 68-year-old man protecting his unconscious wife. Sam kept his voice calm, conversational, the tone he had used to talk down jumpers in Chicago who stood on ledges considering their final choice. That is the image that will define you forever, Chancellor. Not your coronation, not your authority, just an old man dying because you were afraid of what his wife represented. The weapon trembled slightly. Vorath's breathing came faster, audible in the Grand Hall's emergency lighting silence. Sam felt calculation happening in the mind behind the weapon, weighing options that narrowed with every second the broadcast continued. Movement stirred beneath Sam's protective crouch. Seraphine's breathing changed pattern, consciousness returning in stages that manifested as gradually brightening luminescence. Her hand found Sam's arm, gripping with strength that suggested reserves he had not known she possessed. Her whisper barely carried beyond the two of them. "Sam, move. Let me handle this." "Not happening, ma'am. Please, trust me." Sam had spent 34 years learning to read people in crisis, understanding when someone possessed capability they had not yet demonstrated versus when they were overestimating their own capacity for survival. Seraphine's voice carried certainty that felt different from the frightened laboratory subject who had trembled through a forced ceremony 3 days ago. He rolled sideways, giving her space while remaining close enough to intercept it if Vorath's weapon tracked toward her. Seraphine rose slowly, her movements deliberate despite obvious exhaustion from the power surge that had knocked out every system in the Grand Hall. Her bioluminescence steadied into patterns that seemed to pulse in rhythm with embassy infrastructure itself. She stood fully, meeting Vorath's gaze without flinching from the weapon still raised between them. "You spent 20 years teaching me I was worthless, dangerous, a failed experiment that deserved only disposal." Her voice carried through the hall with resonance that made the air vibrate. "But you were wrong. I am not dangerous because I am defective. I am dangerous because I am exactly what my father designed me to be." Her hands moved in gestures Sam did not recognize, fingers tracing patterns that seemed to interact with electromagnetic fields invisible to human perception. The embassy's systems responded. Lights flickered in sequences that matched her movements. Ventilation adjusted to rhythms synchronized with her breathing. Security doors throughout the structure engaged and disengaged in patterns that suggested conscious control rather than mechanical malfunction. Elena's voice carried triumph. "Royal biological integration. The heir's nervous system interfaces directly with luminary technology. It was Therion's greatest innovation, the genetic modification that made his bloodline uniquely capable of governing through connection rather than control." Seraphine's glow intensified. "I am the embassy, every system, every sensor, every security protocol. They all respond to me because they were built to respond to the rightful heir." Her gaze never left Vorath's face. "Which means I know exactly what you have been planning, Chancellor. The war fleet, the attack coordinates, the timeline that places Earth cities under bombardment within hours." Vorath's weapon wavered. "That information is classified under security protocols you cannot possibly access. I am accessing it right now. Orbital defense platforms, strike packages, target prioritization that begins with population centers most likely to resist luminary occupation." Seraphine's expression hardened into something royal and merciless. "You murdered my parents because they wanted peace. You tried to murder me because I represented that peace. And now you plan to murder billions because power matters more to you than the lives it costs." The weapon lowered slightly. Vorath's ancient face cycled through emotions that suggested calculations failing to produce acceptable outcomes. "Even if you stop me, the council remains. The fleet remains. You are one heir against an entire power structure designed to maintain luminary supremacy." "She is not alone." Marcus stepped from the shadows near the media control station, his guard uniform identifying him as someone who should be supporting Vorath rather than challenging him. "I am Captain Marcus, son of the guard who died protecting the royal family. I stand with the rightful heir." Elena emerged beside him. I am Elena, chief advisor to Queen Lysara. I stand with the rightful heir. More figures materialize from positions throughout the Grand Hall. Loyalists who had positioned themselves during the ceremony's preparation, waiting for this moment. 17 voices declaring allegiance to someone they had believed dead for 20 years. Vorath's weapon rose again, but now his hand shook with rage rather than calculation. This changes nothing. I command the military. I control the council. You have symbolism and sentiment. I have power. You have nothing. Seraphine's voice dropped into something colder than Sam had heard from her. I am revoking your council authority. I am relieving you of all military command, and I am placing you under arrest for regicide, conspiracy, and attempted genocide. You cannot arrest me. You were not crowned. I do not need a crown to be what I am. Her bioluminescence blazed until the entire hall seemed to burn with light that came from within rather than without. I am Seraphine, daughter of Therion and Lysara, rightful heir to the luminary throne, and you are finished. Vorath's weapon swung toward her in one final desperate attempt to eliminate the threat she represented. The shot never fired. Marcus moved with speed that suggested years of combat training waiting for this exact moment. His body intercepted Vorath's aim, taking the energy blast meant for Seraphine directly in his chest. The impact threw him backward into camera equipment that had just begun restoring broadcast functionality. Seraphine's scream carried grief that transcended species boundaries. She moved toward Marcus's fallen bottom form, but Vorath's weapon tracked her movement. Second shot charging, Sam's field medic instincts overrode conscious thought. He lunged from his position on the floor, putting himself between the weapon and Seraphine for the second time in as many minutes. The energy blast caught him high in the right shoulder, spinning him sideways with force that sent him crashing into the platform where Vorath's stolen crown still rested. Pain exploded through his entire right side. Sam's vision grayed at the edges, shock trying to drag him into unconsciousness that would make him useless to everyone still fighting. He forced himself to remain aware, watching Seraphine's bioluminescence erupt into something beyond anything she had demonstrated previously. Her hands moved in patterns too fast to follow. Embassy systems responded instantly. Security doors sealed throughout the structure, trapping Vorath's guards in isolated sections. Weapons disabled simultaneously as electromagnetic pulses targeted every energy source except those Seraphine actively protected. The Grand Hall's main entrance opened, admitting armed personnel whose uniforms identified them as United States Marines. Colonel Sarah Chen strode through the entrance with authority that suggested she had been waiting for exactly this invitation. Chancellor Vorath, by authority of the United States government and international treaty provisions, you are hereby detained pending investigation of multiple violations, including attempted genocide and murder of diplomatic personnel. Vorath stood surrounded, his weapon useless. His power structure collapsed, his centuries of calculated control reduced to nothing by a woman he had tried to erase 2 decades ago. His expression cycled through rage and resignation before settling into something almost like bitter respect. The heir survives. How unfortunate for everyone. His gaze found Seraphine, who knelt beside Marcus's still form while maintaining the electromagnetic control that kept weapons disabled throughout the embassy. You will make a terrible queen, child. Too soft, too human, too willing to forgive when strength requires ruthlessness. Seraphine's hands continued their emergency medical work on Marcus, her bioluminescence channeling into focused healing energy that Sam recognized from his own medic training, despite never seeing it expressed through alien biology. I will make the queen my parents intended, the one who builds peace rather than wages war. And I will do it by being exactly what you tried to destroy. Marines moved forward to secure Vorath. He did not resist, simply allowed himself to be escorted toward detention with the detachment of someone who had already calculated all possible futures and found none acceptable. Sam tried to stand, his right arm completely non-functional and blood loss making the world tilt in directions that defied physics. He made it approximately 3 steps before his legs forgot their purpose, and the floor rushed up to meet him with enthusiastic violence. Seraphine's face appeared above him, her features distorted by tears that glowed as they fell. Sam, no, stay with me. Please, stay with me. He wanted to reassure her that field wounds looked worse than they actually were, that he had survived worse at Kafji, that this was just another day in a career built on bleeding for people who needed someone to stand between them and death. But his voice would not cooperate, and darkness kept trying to pull him under. Her hands pressed against his shoulder wound, bioluminescence pouring into damaged tissue with intensity that burned in ways the original blast had not. Sam felt something fundamental shift in his cellular structure. Alien biology interfacing with human physiology through mechanisms he could not begin to comprehend. "You are not leaving me." Seraphine's voice carried command that came from somewhere deeper than personal desperation. "You stayed when everyone else ran. You protected me when I believed I was worthless. You taught me how to be strong enough to take my throne, and I will not become queen by watching you die for me." The burning intensified until Sam's entire consciousness focused on nothing except the sensation of being rebuilt at a molecular level by someone whose power he had spent 3 days helping her remember existed. His breathing steadied, his vision cleared. The bleeding stopped as alien healing factors closed wounds that should have required surgical intervention and weeks of recovery. Seraphine collapsed forward onto his chest, her bioluminescence dimming to almost nothing. "Live, Sam, please. I need you to live." He found his voice somewhere in the darkness that was gradually releasing its grip. "Still here, ma'am. Still breathing." Her sob carried relief that transcended language. She stayed pressed against his chest, her fading luminescence mixing with blood that had stopped flowing, while around them the grand hall filled with activity that suggested crisis transitioning into aftermath. Colonel Chen approached with medics who immediately began scanning both Sam and Seraphine for injuries requiring intervention beyond what alien healing had already accomplished. She knelt beside them, her expression carrying professional assessment and something that might have been respect. "Mr. Harrison, you have approximately 15 different agencies wanting to debrief you on everything that has happened in the last 72 hours. But first, medical attention and rest." She looked at Seraphine. "Your Majesty, the United States government formally recognizes your claim to the luminary throne and requests immediate discussion of the war fleet currently in orbital position." Seraphine raised her head with effort that suggested her healing work had exhausted reserves she barely possessed. "The fleet stands down. I have transmitted royal authority codes that revoke all attacks orders and place military forces under interim council command pending formal restructuring." Her voice carried exhaustion, but also certainty. "There will be no war. My parents died trying to build peace. I will not dishonor their memory by letting fear override their vision." Chen nodded once. "Then with your permission, Your Majesty, we have medical facilities and secure locations where you and your husband can recover while diplomatic protocols are established." "Sam stays with me." Not a request, a statement of requirement that admitted no negotiation. "Understood." The hours that followed blurred into exhaustion, managed by medical intervention and bureaucratic processes that transformed crisis into documented resolution. Sam woke in a medical facility somewhere within the embassy's structure, his shoulder bandaged despite alien healing that had already closed the worst damage. Seraphine sat beside his bed, her bioluminescence dimmed to barely perceptible levels, her hand resting on his uninjured arm. She smiled when his eyes opened. "You scared me." "Occupational hazard, ma'am. Combat medics are not known for personal safety." "Former combat medic, you are now royal advisor if you accept the position." Sam's laugh hurt his shoulder. "I am a janitor who got lucky. You are the man who saved my life repeatedly, who helped me remember who I truly am, who stood between me and death without hesitation." Her expression softened into something beyond gratitude. "And you are the person my father chose to protect me when he knew he could not. So yes, Sam Harrison, you are exactly who I need beside me as I learn how to be the queen my parents intended." The formal ceremonies happened gradually over the following weeks as embassies coordinated and governments negotiated terms for transitions that rewrote diplomatic relationships established 15 years earlier. Vorath faced trial for crimes that included regicide, conspiracy, and attempted genocide. The evidence from Sam's archive discovery proved sufficient to dismantle the Council's corrupt authority structure and replace it with governance that honored the original treaty's peaceful intentions. Marcus survived his wounds through combination of immediate medical intervention and the same alien and healing factors Seraphine had used to save Sam. He accepted the position of Royal Guard captain, the role his father had died performing 20 years earlier. Elena returned to her position as chief advisor, providing institutional knowledge that helped Seraphine navigate political complexities without falling into traps her inexperience might otherwise miss. Sam stood beside Seraphine during her formal coronation 6 weeks after the Grand Hall confrontation. This ceremony bore no resemblance to the forced marriage that had initiated their connection. Human and luminary dignitaries filled seats in genuine celebration rather than obligatory attendance. Cameras broadcast to networks that had spent weeks analyzing every detail of the conspiracy that had nearly triggered interplanetary war. When the crown touched Seraphine's head, her bioluminescence blazed with intensity that made the original ceremony seem dim by comparison. She stood as queen of the luminary people, rightful heir finally claiming inheritance, stolen through murder and sustained through systematic abuse. Her first official act involved treaty revisions that transformed relationships between Earth and Luminary from tentative cooperation into genuine alliance. Her second act established oversight systems that would prevent future councils from accumulating unchecked authority. Her third act honored those who had died protecting her family and those who had survived to restore her throne. Sam accepted his formal position as royal advisor with the same uncomfortable reluctance he had demonstrated toward every recognition of his service throughout his life. The role came with quarters adjacent to the royal residence, formal robes that felt as uncomfortable as his maintenance uniform had felt natural, and responsibilities that required him to attend diplomatic functions where people actually noticed his presence. He adjusted gradually, learning to navigate political complexities with the same calm assessment he had applied to triage situations. His military experience proved valuable for security restructuring. His medical background informed healthcare system improvements. His fundamental decency provided moral foundation for policies that prioritize people over power. Months passed. The embassy transformed from sovereign territory hiding conspiracy into genuine diplomatic center where humans and luminary worked together without pretense or manipulation. The war fleet demobilized. Trade agreements replaced military posturing. Cultural exchange programs flourished where suspicion had previously festered. Sam's daughter called during his third month as royal advisor. She had watched the news coverage, read the investigative reports, seen her father standing beside an alien queen as honored advisor rather than invisible janitor. Her voice carried emotions too complicated for simple apology. "Dad, I did not know any of it, what you had been doing, who you were helping." Sam sat in his new quarters, looking out the windows that showed Washington monuments rather than maintenance corridors. "You could not have known. I was invisible by design." "Will you tell me about it? All of it? When the diplomatic schedule allows, I would like that." They talked for 2 hours, rebuilding connection that had crumbled after Ellen's death. It was not forgiveness exactly, more like mutual recognition that grief had damaged them both, and healing required acknowledging the damage without pretending it had never existed. The formal peace treaty signing happened on neutral ground, a ceremony held at the United Nations building in New York, where human and luminary leadership could demonstrate genuine partnership before global media. Seraphine delivered remarks that honored her parents' vision while acknowledging the painful path required to achieve it. Sam stood slightly behind her, positioned where royal advisors belonged, watching her confidence transform from fragile determination into natural authority. She had become the queen Therian and Lysara had hoped for, someone who led through wisdom rather than force, who prioritized building better systems over maintaining comfortable lives. After the ceremony, they stood together on an observation deck overlooking the East River, the diplomatic functions continuing without them for precious minutes of privacy. Seraphine's bioluminescence pulsed softly in the evening light. "Sam, do you ever regret it, being pulled into this?" He considered the question with the same careful assessment he applied to all matters of consequence. "I spent 34 years wondering why I survived when better people died. Martinez at CAFG, partners in Chicago who took bullets meant for civilians. Ellen from cancer that medicine could not stop." His voice carried weight of decades. "Meeting you gave me an answer. Not the answer I expected. Not the answer I would have chosen. But the one that made sense of everything that came before. What answer is that? That survival only matters if you do something with it, if you use the time you are given to make things better for people who come after. He looked at her, this woman who had been laboratory subject, enforced bride, and terrified victim, before becoming someone who ruled with compassion backed by strength. You needed someone who would not leave you behind. I needed a reason to matter. We found each other because both of us refused to accept that invisible meant worthless. Seraphine's hand found his, her luminescent skin warm against his weathered palm. You are not invisible anymore. No, ma'am, neither are you. They stood together, watching the river flow beneath bridges that connected boroughs. Two people from impossible circumstances who had built something neither could have achieved alone. Above them, the luminary war fleet had transformed into peaceful presence, ships that guarded rather than threatened. Behind them, governments continued negotiations that would define relationships for generations yet unborn. Sam thought about Therion's final safeguard, the selection criteria that had identified a 68-year-old maintenance worker as suitable protection for a daughter the king would never see grow into her throne. Medical training, combat experience, moral character that prioritized protecting others above personal safety. The old king had chosen well. Seraphine's voice pulled him from reflection. What happens now, after the treaties are signed and systems are rebuilt? Sam smiled, the expression carrying contentment he had not allowed himself in decades. We keep working, keep building, keep making sure the peace your parents died for becomes permanent enough that their grandchildren never know what war feels like. Grandchildren. Her bioluminescence brightened with something that might have been hope or embarrassment or both. That implies children first. That implies whatever future you choose to build, ma'am. I am just here to make sure you survive long enough to build it. She leaned against his shoulder, her glow warming them both against the evening chill. Thank you, Sam, for everything. Thank you for reminding me that it is never too late to matter. They returned to the diplomatic functions eventually, responsibilities calling them back to roles that had become natural through repetition and necessity. But in that moment on the observation deck, they were simply two people who had survived impossible odds through mutual refusal to abandon each other. The invisible man who had learned he could still be seen. The erased princess who had remembered she was always a queen. Together, they had rewritten history, and together they would build the future that history demanded.